Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the heart of one of history's most shocking disasters, the Great Fire of London. It was September 2nd, 1666, and what started as a small spark in a baker's oven quickly turned into a roaring inferno that would ravage the city for 4 days straight. This wasn't the London we often imagine, with grand palaces and charming cobblestone streets. No, this was a city teetering on the edge, where the very buildings that defined it were the very things that would destroy it. The air thick with smoke, the streets filled with chaos, where survival wasn't guaranteed and every corner seemed to bring a new danger. But before we get lost in the flames, do me a favor, take a moment to like the video and hit subscribe. Only if you enjoy what I do here, of course. And drop a comment, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always incredible to see how far our journey tonight is reaching. Now dim the lights, take a deep breath, and maybe, just maybe, set the scene with a little background hum from your fan. Let's ease into tonight's story and see what the fire left behind. Born on April 21, 1926, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was not always destined to be queen. In fact, her early life seemed to chart a course away from the throne. She was the first child of the Duke and Duchess of York, later known as King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, who would only ascend the throne after the sudden abdication of her uncle, King Edward VII, in 1936. Before that moment, Elizabeth was a princess with no expectation of ever becoming queen. Her early years were shaped by a mixture of royal formality and the private stability of a loving family. The first few years of her life were marked by the relative peace and security of the 1920s. Elizabeth's father, Prince Albert, Duke of York, was second in line to the throne at the time, and her mother, the Duchess, was known for her kind nature and strong public presence. The family was not under the constant scrutiny that would later come to define their lives. However, the young Elizabeth and her sister Margaret would experience a life filled with public events, royal obligations, and the traditional upbringing of aristocracy, while also enjoying moments of quiet family life away from the public eye. In her early childhood, Elizabeth showed a keen interest in music and animals, interests that would persist throughout her life. Unlike many children born into royalty, Elizabeth's childhood was far from a gilded cage. The Duke and Duchess, although royal in rank, took a hands-on approach to their children's upbringing. The young princess was homeschooled along with her sister Margaret, receiving lessons in history, French, and the Bible. Her tutors, though formally appointed, were often careful to instill a sense of duty, discipline, and a love for the British Empire's history in both daughters. It was clear that Elizabeth, even at a young age, was both inquisitive and attentive. Elizabeth's relationship with her parents, particularly her father, was one of mutual respect and affection. Her father, though somewhat reserved, was a figure of stability and reliability, especially in the tumultuous years that followed his unexpected ascension to the throne. The abdication crisis of 1936 was the catalyst that altered the course of Elizabeth's life forever. King Edward VII, who was already controversial for his relationship with Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, made the momentous decision to abdicate the throne. This left Elizabeth's father, George VI, to inherit the crown. Elizabeth, who was only 10 years old at the time, suddenly found herself next in line to the throne, her position elevated in an instant from that of an ordinary princess to the future queen of the United Kingdom. This change, though momentous, was not immediately understood by Elizabeth. At such a young age, the responsibilities of monarchy were beyond her grasp, and the changes were not immediately reflected in her day-to-day life. Yet the impact on her family was immense. The Duke of York, who had never expected to be king, had to swiftly adjust to his new role. For Elizabeth's mother, it meant stepping into a more public and demanding role as queen consort. For Elizabeth, it meant that the safety net of her childhood, a life of relative obscurity, was rapidly eroding. While Elizabeth's public life was about to change dramatically, her family's private life underwent its own transformations. George VI's ascension to the throne was fraught with challenges. The new king suffered from a debilitating stammer, something that became well known to the British public, especially when the king had to make speeches. The pressures of being king in a time of political instability and mounting global tensions were extraordinary. Yet Elizabeth, by this point, began to develop a sense of duty that would define her throughout her reign. As Europe slid into the chaos of World War II, Elizabeth's life, although still in its early stages, would be shaped by the conflict in ways that would have far-reaching implications. While she remained in Britain, the royal family, including the young princesses, faced growing calls for them to remain at home, despite the increasing risk of bombing raids over London. Elizabeth's mother, Queen Elizabeth, famously rejected the idea of evacuating to Canada, stating that the royal family would stay in London with the people. This decision left Elizabeth and her sister Margaret to remain in London, although they were moved to Windsor Castle for safety as the Blitz raged across the capital. Though Elizabeth had no formal training or preparation for the duties that lay ahead, her childhood years had instilled a strong sense of resilience and a deep understanding of duty. The years spent in the midst of war would shape her character, providing her with first-hand experience in leadership, resilience, and commitment to a nation's well-being. By the end of the war, Elizabeth had become more than just a princess. She had become a symbol of continuity, stability, and hope for the British people during a time of unprecedented upheaval. In 1947, at the age of 21, Elizabeth took on a more prominent public role, embarking on a tour of South Africa with her parents. It was during this trip that Elizabeth made a speech in Cape Town that would later become iconic. She declared, "I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." This solemn vow, made in the midst of a global conflict, would foreshadow the remarkable life of service that Elizabeth would lead as queen. Little did the public know at the time that this was not just a promise to a colony or a people far away. It was a vow that would echo throughout the world, binding her future to the fate of an empire in decline and the hopes of a nation rebuilding itself after war. Yet Elizabeth's life was still far from the monarchy she would come to embody. Despite the looming shadows of royal duty, she was still at the time a young woman with hopes, dreams, and personal struggles. Her family's growing tension with the looming prospect of her father's ill health would soon leave Elizabeth standing at the precipice of her future. At this point, she could not have known just how dramatically her life was about to change. As World War II drew to a close and the British Empire began its slow dissolution, Elizabeth's path would soon become irrevocably entwined with the responsibilities of the crown. But what would happen next? How would the death of her father and the transition from a princess to a queen change Elizabeth, personally and publicly? The death of King George VI on February 6, 1952, thrust Elizabeth, at just 25 years old, into the role of monarch. It was a moment of profound personal loss and public expectation. Elizabeth, who had spent her life preparing for the possibility of becoming queen, now faced the responsibility of a throne she had never anticipated inheriting so soon. But this was only the beginning of her journey, one that would see the monarchy evolve in ways that her ancestors could never have imagined. As a young woman newly crowned, Elizabeth faced not only the burdens of kingship but the challenges of an ever-changing world. The British Empire, the vast network of colonies that once spanned continents, was in decline. The post-World War II period was a time of dramatic change, marked by decolonization, the rise of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers, and the growth of modern democracy and technology. The royal family, once a symbol of imperial power and tradition, now found itself in a world where monarchy was increasingly seen as irrelevant by many. In this new era, Elizabeth would have to redefine the role of the British monarchy. The early years of Elizabeth's reign were marked by a personal commitment to her royal duties. Despite the weight of grief from losing her father, Elizabeth was determined to carry out her responsibilities with grace and dedication. Her coronation, held on June 2, 1953, was a historic moment not only for Britain but for the world. It was the first time in history that a British coronation was televised, bringing the event to millions of people across the globe. The coronation symbolized not just the ascension of a young queen, but also the modernization of the monarchy itself. Elizabeth's decision to open the ceremony to the world via television marked a significant shift in how the royal family would engage with the public in the years to come. However, the coronation was just the beginning of the challenges Elizabeth would face. The early years of her reign were marked by the heavy burden of maintaining the monarchy's relevance in a rapidly changing world. As former colonies gained independence, the British Empire dissolved and the Commonwealth of Nations took shape. Elizabeth, who had been a symbol of empire, now had to adapt to a more symbolic role within a diverse and globalized world. In this era of change, the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to adapt to the times without losing its historical significance. Elizabeth, aware of the monarchy's need to evolve, worked tirelessly to modernize the royal family's public image. She embraced technology, moving beyond the formal and staid image of previous monarchs. Television appearances, documentaries, and interviews became tools to humanize the monarchy and connect with ordinary citizens. Elizabeth's famous speeches, such as the ones given during her Silver Jubilee in 1977, emphasized continuity and the importance of public service. Her voice became a constant in the lives of the British people, a reassuring presence in times of upheaval. But as the monarchy evolved, it did not go without its share of scandals and challenges. The 1970s and 1980s saw significant shifts in public opinion about the royal family. The breakdown of her children's marriages, particularly that of Princess Diana and Prince Charles, thrust the monarchy into the limelight in ways that were both controversial and damaging to its image. The media's obsession with the royal family's personal lives reached new heights, and Elizabeth, once revered as the epitome of stoic dignity, found herself increasingly in the spotlight for the wrong reasons. In 1992, Elizabeth's Annus Horribilis, horrible year, culminated in the divorce of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, as well as a fire at Windsor Castle that destroyed parts of the royal residence. The events of that year forced Elizabeth to confront not only the challenges of maintaining a modern monarchy, but also the vulnerability of her family in the eyes of the public. For the first time in her reign, Elizabeth had to acknowledge the deepening divide between the royal family and the British public. Yet, she weathered these storms with a sense of duty that never wavered. While Elizabeth was confronted with personal and public challenges, her leadership remained steady. She worked relentlessly to maintain the monarchy's relevance, proving her adaptability in a world where public opinion could change in an instant. Her response to the 1997 death of Princess Diana was a turning point in her relationship with the British people. Initially criticized for not publicly mourning Diana, Elizabeth, under increasing pressure, made a statement that resonated with her people. She recognized Diana's contribution to the royal family and the profound impact her death had on the public, a gesture that helped to heal some of the wounds caused by the previous years of turmoil. Through all of this, Elizabeth remained steadfast in her belief in the importance of service. Her dedication to her role as monarch never faltered, and over the years she became the longest-reigning British monarch in history, surpassing even the reign of her great-great-grandmother Queen Victoria in 2015. By that point, Elizabeth had lived through numerous political, cultural, and technological transformations, and yet she remained a constant presence in the lives of the British people. Her reign, which spanned over 6 decades, had witnessed remarkable events, from the end of the Cold War to the advent of the internet and the rise of social media. Elizabeth's reign also saw significant changes within the Commonwealth of Nations. As nations around the world became more politically and socially diverse, the Commonwealth adapted, and Elizabeth's role as the symbolic head of the Commonwealth became increasingly important. She worked tirelessly to foster relationships between the nations of the Commonwealth, traveling to many of its countries and supporting initiatives aimed at improving education, health, and development. But despite all of her successes, Elizabeth's monarchy was not immune to criticism. The monarchy's role in the modern world continued to be questioned, and Elizabeth herself faced scrutiny over the relevance of the royal family in a democratic society. The media, especially in the age of social media, became an ever-present force that shaped public perception. Nevertheless, Elizabeth remained committed to her role, finding ways to balance the demands of tradition with the expectations of the modern world. Through it all, Elizabeth remained a figurehead, a symbol of continuity, stability, and duty. She understood the importance of balancing the monarchy's long-standing traditions with the realities of modern life. Even as the monarchy evolved and adapted, Elizabeth's sense of service and commitment to her people remained unwavering. But as the years went on, Elizabeth's health began to decline, and questions arose about the future of the monarchy and the role her son, Prince Charles, would play. Would the monarchy continue to evolve under his leadership? How would Elizabeth's long reign impact the future of the British royal family? These were questions that many would have to confront as they looked to the next phase of the monarchy's journey. Queen Elizabeth II's reign, which spanned over 6 decades, is one of the longest in the history of the monarchy. By the time of her passing in 2022, Elizabeth had become not just a symbol of British stability, but also a figure that represented continuity in a rapidly changing world. Her personal journey from a young princess unexpectedly thrust into power to a monarch who saw her country and the world evolve was not only a reflection of her own resilience and commitment, but also of the royal family's ability to adapt to the modern world. As Elizabeth entered her later years, her reign began to be characterized by her legacy. She had already lived through dramatic changes in both the monarchy and the world at large. The British Empire was long gone, and the United Kingdom was now a part of the globalized, interconnected world. The monarchy itself had undergone profound transformation, moving away from a symbol of imperial power to one focused more on charity, diplomacy, and national unity. During the final decades of Elizabeth's reign, the British monarchy was more public than ever before. The increased media attention, fueled by 24-hour news cycles and social media, changed the way people viewed not only the royal family but also the institution of monarchy itself. The once inaccessible royal family had become more humanized, with members of the family frequently involved in charity work, international diplomacy, and public events. Elizabeth herself, while not as actively involved in the day-to-day of public life in her later years, remained an omnipresent figure, the face of the monarchy that adapted to the times while maintaining its historical dignity. The 2012 London Olympics marked one of the most iconic moments of Elizabeth's later years. In the opening ceremony, she appeared in a humorous and memorable moment alongside actor Daniel Craig, portraying the character of James Bond. This moment, which blended both tradition and modernity, encapsulated Elizabeth's reign, always maintaining a sense of humor, but never compromising the royal dignity that she held dear. Her sense of tradition, combined with her willingness to embrace the modern world, kept her firmly in the hearts of the British public, even as her role continued to evolve. As the years progressed, Elizabeth's monarchy continued to be the subject of public discussion. The debates surrounding her reign and the monarchy's role in modern society grew louder. One of the central issues that arose was the future of the monarchy itself. After all, Elizabeth had been a constant fixture in the British landscape for so long. But as she aged, the question loomed larger: what would happen when she was no longer there? The question of succession was not new, but it had never been so pressing. Elizabeth had watched her son, Charles, evolve from a young prince to the heir apparent. Prince Charles, who had faced his own public challenges, particularly with his marriage to Princess Diana and the aftermath of their highly publicized divorce, had spent decades preparing for the role that his mother held. Yet it was clear that the monarchy would face new challenges under his leadership, challenges that Elizabeth had successfully navigated, but that would be tested in a new era. As Elizabeth's reign progressed, the issues of monarchy's relevance, the role of tradition in a democratic society, and the expectations of the public continued to be debated. Throughout these discussions, Elizabeth remained a steadying force, a reminder of the monarchy's ability to adapt to the changing times. Her presence became not just about a title or a position, but about the concept of service to the nation and the Commonwealth. For Elizabeth, it was never about personal power, it was always about the people she served. In 2015, Elizabeth became the longest-reigning British monarch in history, surpassing Queen Victoria. The milestone was celebrated not only as a personal achievement, but also as a testament to her perseverance, dedication, and sense of duty. This achievement, however, was not a moment of reflection for Elizabeth. It was a natural part of her enduring commitment to her role. Her reign continued to evolve, with the monarchy adapting to new global realities, even as Elizabeth herself remained the symbol of tradition. Throughout her reign, Elizabeth had witnessed the transformation of her country, her monarchy, and the world. The United Kingdom, once at the heart of a vast empire, had changed to become a member of the European Union, and then had gone through the tumultuous Brexit process in 2016, leading to the country's decision to leave the EU. The monarchy under Elizabeth had remained above the political fray, but was a constant presence throughout these changes. Elizabeth's role as the head of state was one of symbolic importance. She maintained the monarchy's continuity during a period of significant national and international upheaval. Even in her final years, Elizabeth was involved in the events that shaped the future of the monarchy. The gradual passing of her duties to her children and grandchildren marked a changing of the guard, with Prince Charles, Prince William, and other family members stepping into roles of increasing responsibility. Yet even in these moments of transition, Elizabeth's guidance remained a quiet but constant force, influencing the direction of the monarchy. Her legacy, therefore, was not simply in the many years she had reigned, but in the foundation she had laid for the future of the royal family. By the time Elizabeth passed away, she had transformed the monarchy into something that would endure long after her reign. Her ability to weather personal loss, public scandals, and the challenges of modernity had shaped the institution of the British monarchy into something that resonated with the people, not as an outdated symbol of power, but as a living, breathing entity that connected the past with the future. The impact of Elizabeth's reign is felt in the way the monarchy continues to function today. Prince Charles, now King Charles III, ascended to the throne with the legacy of his mother to guide him. The monarchy's role in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth continues to be debated, but the model of leadership Elizabeth had established, with its emphasis on service, dedication, and adaptability, remains as a powerful influence on the future of the institution. And while Elizabeth is no longer with us, her legacy endures. The monarchy, which she carefully navigated through one of the most challenging periods of its history, stands as a testament to the role of tradition and continuity in an ever-changing world. It raises the question: how will future generations view the monarchy? Will it continue to adapt to modern times, or will its role inevitably change as society evolves? The legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, in many ways, will serve as a compass for the monarchy's future direction. What lessons can we learn from Elizabeth II's reign, and how will the monarchy evolve in the coming decades? With her departure, we are left to ponder the answers to these questions and reflect on the remarkable endurance of her service and legacy. The story of the Roman Empire begins not with the grandeur of empire building, but with the establishment of the Roman Republic, a precursor to the imperial dominance that would later define Rome. In the early days of Rome, the city itself was a small settlement on the banks of the Tiber River, founded around the middle of the 8th century BCE. It was a time of myth and legend, with stories of Romulus and Remus, twin brothers suckled by a she-wolf, representing the symbolic birth of the city. However, the reality of Rome's rise was rooted in a unique political experiment that would define its future and lead to the transformation of the Roman state. Initially, Rome was governed by kings. The Roman kingdom, as it is called, lasted for about 240 years. But in 509 BCE, after the overthrow of the last Roman king, Tarquin the Proud, a new system of government was established. The Roman Republic emerged from the ashes of monarchy and was built on the idea of shared power among elected officials. This transition was not merely a symbolic shift, it laid the foundation for what would later become one of the most powerful and influential political systems in the ancient world. The Roman Republic was a system designed with checks and balances. The central element was a Senate composed of patricians, members of Rome's aristocratic families who served for life. The Senate's role was advisory, but it became the dominant political force shaping policy and decision-making. Alongside the Senate, there were two consuls elected annually by the citizens. The consuls held executive power and were responsible for commanding the army, administering laws, and overseeing the daily functions of government. Their powers, however, were not absolute. They were limited by their term length and by the Senate's authority. The early days of the Republic were defined by constant conflict with surrounding tribes and states. Rome was located in the heart of the Italian peninsula, and its proximity to powerful neighbors meant that its survival depended on military might and diplomatic skill. The Romans, however, were adept at both. They expanded their territory slowly but steadily, initially focusing on their immediate surroundings before branching out. Through alliances, military victories, and calculated diplomacy, Rome began to solidify its position as a dominant force in the region. The Roman military was the cornerstone of its success. The legions, composed of Roman citizens who were also soldiers, were known for their discipline, organization, and effectiveness in battle. The Roman soldier, the legionary, was an essential part of the Republic's expansion. His training was rigorous and his loyalty to Rome was unwavering. This military prowess allowed Rome to conquer vast swaths of territory, eventually bringing all of Italy under its control. One of the most significant events in the early Republic was the conflict between the patricians and the plebeians, the common people of Rome. The patricians controlled much of the political and economic power, leaving the plebeians to suffer under a system that seemed designed to benefit only the elite. This inequality led to a series of social and political struggles known as the conflict of the orders, which lasted for centuries. The plebeians fought for more rights and political power, eventually securing several important reforms. In 494 BCE, the plebeians staged their first secession, a mass withdrawal from the city to protest their lack of representation. This event marked a turning point in the Republic's development. The plebeians won the right to elect their own officials known as tribunes who could veto decisions made by the Senate. Over time, the plebeians gained more influence, and by the 3rd century BCE, the Roman Republic had become a more inclusive and to an extent egalitarian system. Despite these internal struggles, Rome's military successes continued. By the early 3rd century BCE, Rome had expanded beyond Italy, establishing itself as the dominant power in the Mediterranean region. Rome's involvement in the Punic Wars, a series of 3 wars fought against the North African city-state of Carthage, marked a key moment in the Republic's rise to power. The First Punic War, 264–241 BCE, was fought over control of Sicily, and although it ended in a costly victory for Rome, it set the stage for the Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, during which Rome would face its greatest military threat in the form of the Carthaginian general Hannibal. Hannibal's campaign, which included his famous crossing of the Alps with war elephants, nearly destroyed the Roman Republic. His victories at the Battle of Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae were devastating, and for a time it seemed as though Rome might collapse under the pressure. However, Rome's resilience, its ability to rebuild and adapt in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, became one of the defining characteristics of the Republic. The Roman general Scipio Africanus ultimately defeated Hannibal at the Battle of Zama in 202 BCE, solidifying Rome's dominance in the western Mediterranean. Following the Punic Wars, Rome's power expanded even further. It began to annex territories across the Mediterranean, including Greece, Asia Minor, and parts of Spain and North Africa. The conquest of these lands was not just about territorial expansion, it was about Rome's ambition to control the entire Mediterranean world. The Republic was, at this point, a vast and powerful state, but it was also facing growing internal strains. Political corruption, social inequality, and the increasing influence of military generals began to erode the foundations of the Republic. The expansion of Rome had also led to the accumulation of vast wealth. but the distribution of that wealth was unequal. While some Romans became incredibly rich from their conquests, the common people suffered. Small farmers, once the backbone of the Roman army, found themselves unable to compete with the wealthy elites who owned large estates worked by slaves. The growing wealth gap and the increasing power of military leaders would set the stage for the eventual collapse of the Roman Republic. The rise of powerful generals like Gaius Marius, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, and Julius Caesar disrupted the political balance of the Republic. These men gained loyalty not to the Senate but to their armies, creating a dangerous shift in Roman politics. The Senate, once the heart of Roman power, was becoming increasingly powerless in the face of military might. The Republic was on the verge of collapse. In 49 BCE, Julius Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River with his army, defying the Senate's orders and sparking a civil war. The phrase "crossing the Rubicon" became synonymous with making an irreversible decision. Caesar's victory in the Civil War and his subsequent appointment as dictator for life marked the end of the Roman Republic. While Caesar's reign was brief, he was assassinated in 44 BCE. It set the stage for the rise of his heir, Augustus, and the transition from republic to empire. At the end of Section 1, we have witnessed the creation of a republic that expanded through military power, internal reform, and political struggle. Yet it was these very successes and internal tensions that would lay the groundwork for the eventual transition to empire. Would Rome, having conquered most of the known world, be able to maintain its republic in the face of corruption, civil wars, and the rising power of military leaders? The fall of the Roman Republic was not an immediate or sudden event. It was the culmination of decades of political instability, military overreach, and social inequality. The key turning point in the demise of the Republic came with the rise of Julius Caesar, whose ambitions and actions irrevocably altered the course of Roman history. Caesar was not the first general to challenge the political order of the Republic, but his actions were the most decisive and transformative. Gaius Julius Caesar was born into an aristocratic family in 100 BCE, but he was not initially in a position to challenge the established power structures of the Republic. His early career was marked by his military service and political maneuvering. He quickly rose through the ranks of Roman politics, building connections with powerful individuals like Pompey the Great and Crassus, two of the most influential men in Rome at the time. Together, the three men formed what is known as the First Triumvirate, a political alliance that allowed them to control Rome's government and military decisions. This alliance was formed out of mutual interest, with each member seeking to advance his own career and power. Caesar's early military career was marked by several successful campaigns, most notably his conquest of Gaul, modern-day France, and parts of Belgium, Switzerland, and Germany. The Gallic Wars, which lasted from 58 BCE to 50 BCE, were a turning point in Caesar's rise to power. His victory over the Gallic tribes not only brought immense wealth and territory to Rome, but it also made Caesar a hero in the eyes of the Roman people. His successes on the battlefield, however, also made him increasingly popular and powerful, two things that were beginning to unsettle his political allies, particularly Pompey. Pompey, once an ally of Caesar, grew increasingly wary of Caesar's rising influence. Pompey had his own military successes, particularly in the East, where he had expanded Rome's influence over the Mediterranean. But as Caesar's fame and power grew, Pompey saw him as a potential rival. The two men's relationship began to sour, and the political alliance that had once held the Republic together began to unravel. Tensions reached a boiling point when Caesar's term as governor of Gaul came to an end in 50 BCE. The Senate, now under Pompey's influence, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome. Caesar, however, had no intention of relinquishing his power so easily. In 49 BCE, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River with his army, a direct challenge to the Senate's authority. The phrase "crossing the Rubicon" has since become synonymous with making an irreversible decision. By marching on Rome with his legions, Caesar sparked a civil war that would reshape the Roman state. Pompey, now Caesar's rival, fled to Greece, where he gathered an army to challenge Caesar. The ensuing civil war, which lasted for several years, was a struggle not just for control of Rome, but for the very future of the Roman political system. The civil war between Caesar and Pompey culminated in the decisive Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, where Caesar's forces defeated Pompey's army. Pompey himself fled to Egypt, where he was ultimately assassinated. With Pompey's death, Caesar emerged as the undisputed leader of Rome. However, his rise to power was not without controversy. Many Romans, particularly the senatorial elite, saw Caesar's actions as a threat to the Republic's core values of shared power and democracy. Yet for Caesar, the reality was clear. The Republic was no longer functioning as it had once done. The political system that had governed Rome for centuries was outdated and incapable of responding to the needs of an empire. After his victory, Caesar was appointed dictator, first for a term of 1 year, then for 10 years, and finally in 44 BCE for life. This appointment as dictator for life was a clear indication that Caesar intended to centralize power in his hands, permanently altering the political structure of Rome. During his time in power, Caesar enacted a series of reforms designed to stabilize and strengthen Rome. He implemented new laws regarding debt relief, land distribution for veterans, and even the calendar, introducing the Julian calendar, which would be used for centuries after his death. While Caesar's reforms brought some much-needed changes, they also created resentment among those who feared his growing power. His concentration of power in the hands of a single man was seen as a betrayal of the republican ideals that Rome had once championed. His decision to take on the title of dictator for life was the final straw for many in the Senate, who feared that Caesar's reign would mark the end of the Republic. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, a group of senators led by Brutus and Cassius assassinated Caesar in a desperate attempt to restore the Republic. However, in killing Caesar, they may have sealed the fate of the Republic, for the events that followed would be even more tumultuous. The death of Julius Caesar did not restore the Roman Republic as many had hoped. Instead, it set off another round of civil wars as Caesar's supporters and his enemies fought for control of Rome. The power vacuum left by Caesar's assassination was filled by his grandnephew and adopted son Gaius Octavius, later known as Augustus. Augustus, along with his generals Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate, but this alliance was short-lived. Tensions soon erupted between Octavian and Antony, culminating in the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, where Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt, securing his power. With Antony's defeat and suicide, Octavian stood as the unchallenged ruler of Rome. In 27 BCE, he formally presented himself to the Senate as Augustus, meaning the revered one, and assumed the title of princeps or first citizen. Although he maintained the facade of republican governance, with the Senate still functioning in theory, Augustus effectively became the first emperor of Rome. His reign marked the beginning of the Roman Empire, a shift from the republican ideals that had once governed Rome to a centralized imperial system that would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries. The transition from republic to empire was a process that had been long in the making. The increasing power of military generals, the breakdown of political institutions, and the challenges of governing a vast and diverse territory all contributed to the collapse of the republic. Julius Caesar, while not the first to challenge the republic's authority, was the catalyst for the final transformation. His rise to power, assassination, and the subsequent civil wars paved the way for Augustus to establish the Roman Empire. As the Roman Republic fell and the empire began, it is clear that the Republic's political institutions were no longer suited to the complexities of governing an expanding empire. The Senate's power had been diminished over time, and the increasing reliance on military might to secure power had shifted the balance of authority from elected officials to military leaders. The question that remains, however, is this: would the Republic have been able to survive if Caesar had not crossed the Rubicon? Or had the seeds of the Republic's demise already been planted long before Caesar rose to power? The establishment of the Roman Empire under Augustus in 27 BCE marked the beginning of a new era in Roman history. For the first time, Rome was ruled by an emperor, and this shift fundamentally altered the political, social, and military fabric of the state. Augustus, who skillfully navigated the delicate balance between maintaining the outward appearance of republican institutions and consolidating real power in his hands, ushered in a period known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. For over 2 centuries, Rome experienced relative stability, prosperity, and territorial expansion. But this golden age, marked by the reigns of Augustus and his successors, was not to last forever. The high point of the empire, the Pax Romana. Under Augustus and his successors, the Roman Empire reached its greatest territorial extent and consolidated its political and military power. Augustus expanded the empire into northern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, bringing vast wealth and resources into Rome's coffers. The empire was at peace for much of this period, largely due to Augustus's efforts to create a strong, centralized administration. He reorganized the military, established permanent standing armies, and reformed the Roman tax system, ensuring that the empire could function effectively. The Pax Romana allowed for the flourishing of trade, the growth of cities, and the construction of monumental infrastructure such as roads, aqueducts, and public buildings. The famous Roman roads stretching across the empire made travel and communication easier and helped unite the vast territories under Roman rule. This infrastructure, along with the spread of Roman law and culture, left a lasting legacy that would shape European civilization for centuries to come. Under the emperors who followed Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero, the empire expanded its influence and maintained relative stability. The arts, architecture, and literature flourished during this time, as the empire's wealth allowed for the patronage of artists and thinkers. Writers such as Ovid, Virgil, and Horace contributed to the Roman cultural renaissance, producing works that would influence European literature for centuries. The era also saw the consolidation of Roman religion and the spread of the imperial cult, in which the emperor was venerated as a divine figure. Yet, despite the relative peace and prosperity of the Pax Romana, the foundations of the empire were beginning to show signs of stress. Beneath the surface of Roman society, cracks were forming that would eventually lead to the empire's decline. The crisis of the 3rd century, political instability and military challenges. The stability of the Pax Romana began to unravel in the 3rd century CE. This period, known as the crisis of the 3rd century, was marked by political instability, economic decline, and military overreach. The Roman Empire faced a series of external threats from barbarian invasions and internal strife, including a constant turnover of emperors, economic turmoil, and social upheaval. One of the key factors in this crisis was the growing power of the military. As the empire expanded, Roman generals became increasingly powerful, often holding the fate of the empire in their hands. This led to a situation in which the emperor was no longer chosen by the Senate or through established succession practices, but rather by military might. Civil wars broke out as rival generals vied for the throne, and emperors were frequently overthrown or assassinated by their own troops. During this time, the empire faced growing pressure from external threats. The Germanic tribes in the north, the Sassanid Persians in the east, and the increasingly aggressive Goths and Vandals placed immense strain on Roman resources. These invasions not only threatened the borders of the empire but also destabilized the internal structure of Roman society. The Roman legions, once an elite force, were now stretched thin, struggling to defend the empire's vast borders while also dealing with internal divisions. The empire's economy also began to falter. The cost of maintaining a vast military and bureaucracy, combined with widespread corruption, led to financial instability. The empire's coinage was debased, leading to inflation, and agricultural production suffered from poor management and frequent invasions. The economic crisis, coupled with political instability, made it increasingly difficult for the Roman Empire to function effectively. In response to these challenges, Emperor Diocletian reigned 284–305 CE, implemented a series of sweeping reforms. He divided the empire into 2 halves, east and west, each ruled by a separate emperor. This division, known as the Tetrarchy, was designed to make the empire more manageable and to improve military coordination. Diocletian also sought to stabilize the economy through price controls and efforts to strengthen the currency. Although Diocletian's reforms temporarily slowed the decline, they were not enough to address the empire's deeper structural issues. The fall of the Western Roman Empire. Despite the efforts of Diocletian and his successors, the Roman Empire continued to weaken. In 313 CE, Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity and allowed it to become a dominant force within the empire. Constantine himself became the first Christian emperor, and his conversion marked a significant shift in Roman religious and cultural identity. However, the rise of Christianity also contributed to the empire's decline. The growing influence of Christianity weakened the traditional Roman polytheistic religion and, some argue, the civic spirit that had once supported the empire. Constantine's founding of the new capital, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, in 330 CE marked the beginning of the division between the Eastern and Western Roman empires. The Western Roman Empire, centered in Rome, was increasingly unable to fend off barbarian invasions. The Visigoths sacked Rome in 410 CE, and the Vandals followed suit in 455 CE. In 476 CE, the last Roman emperor of the West, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, marking the traditional date for the fall of the Western Roman Empire. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed, the Eastern Roman Empire, often referred to as the Byzantine Empire, continued to thrive for several more centuries. Under the leadership of emperors such as Justinian I, the Eastern Empire expanded and preserved many of the traditions and institutions of the old Roman world. The Byzantine Empire would continue to exist until the fall of Constantinople in 1453, but the Western Roman Empire had come to an end. The legacy of Rome. The fall of the Western Roman Empire did not mark the end of Roman civilization, however. The Roman Empire had left a profound and lasting legacy on the Western world. Roman law, language, architecture, and governance would shape the development of medieval Europe, and the idea of a Roman Empire continued to influence European rulers throughout history. The Holy Roman Empire, which emerged in the 9th century, saw itself as the spiritual successor to the Roman Empire, and the ideas of Roman citizenship, law, and imperial power would continue to resonate for centuries. The collapse of the Roman Empire also set the stage for the rise of the medieval world. The barbarian invasions led to the fragmentation of the Western Roman Empire into smaller kingdoms. each of which would eventually contribute to the formation of the European states we recognize today. Christianity, which had become the dominant religion of the empire, spread throughout Europe and helped to shape the culture, politics, and identity of the medieval world. The fall of Rome raises the question, could the Roman Empire have been saved if it had addressed its internal divisions earlier, or was the decline of the empire inevitable, given the vast challenges it faced, both from within and from without? These questions continue to shape our understanding of the rise and fall of civilizations. The dawn of the Industrial Revolution in the late 18th century marked a dramatic shift in human history, altering the course of civilization in ways that are still felt today. What began as a series of modest innovations and small improvements in machinery and labor management in Britain slowly transformed into a global phenomenon that forever changed how people lived, worked, and interacted with the world around them. The beginnings of this era were far from grand or even particularly remarkable, but the cumulative effects of these innovations would build the foundation for an industrialized society. The pre-industrial world was dominated by agrarian economies and manual labor. Most goods were produced in homes or small workshops, and transportation was limited to walking or using animal-drawn carts. The pace of life was slow, and production was often inefficient. However, throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, a series of technological advances began to pave the way for something much larger. These small inventions, seemingly trivial at the time, were the first steps toward a profound transformation. One of the earliest and most important developments was the improvement of the textile industry, which had been struggling with manual production methods. Spinning, weaving, and dyeing were slow processes, and the labor-intensive work was often done by hand or with simple tools. The need for faster and more efficient production led to a series of inventions, most notably the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the power loom. The spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves in 1764, was a simple yet revolutionary device that allowed a single worker to spin multiple spools of thread simultaneously. This drastically increased production capacity and reduced the time and labor needed to create textiles. Soon after, Richard Arkwright invented the water frame, a machine powered by water wheels that could spin thread even faster and more efficiently than the spinning jenny. The power loom, developed by Edmund Cartwright in 1785, further mechanized the weaving process, allowing fabrics to be produced at much greater speeds than ever before. These innovations laid the groundwork for mass production in the textile industry and sparked the development of factory-based production methods. They also created a shift in labor, moving away from home-based production towards centralized factories, where large numbers of workers could operate machines under one roof. While this new system greatly increased output and efficiency, it also created challenges in terms of worker conditions and the organization of labor. Meanwhile, another invention was emerging in the field of transportation that would further accelerate industrialization. The steam engine, originally conceptualized by the ancient Greeks but ignored for centuries, became a key driver of the Industrial Revolution. In the early 18th century, Thomas Newcomen, an English engineer, developed the first practical steam engine for pumping water out of mines. While rudimentary, Newcomen's engine demonstrated the potential of steam power to revolutionize industry. However, it was James Watt, a Scottish inventor, who refined the steam engine in the late 18th century. Watt's improvements made the steam engine much more efficient, and it soon became the power source for a variety of industries, from mining to manufacturing to transportation. Watt's engine was able to provide continuous, reliable power, unlike previous engines that required constant monitoring and maintenance. This innovation allowed factories to operate more efficiently and paved the way for the development of steam-powered trains and ships. The steam engine's adaptability made it a game-changer, opening the door for an industrial society that was no longer bound by natural sources of power like wind or water. It also gave rise to the concept of factory-based production, where large machines could operate in a central location, creating mass-produced goods in a way that had never been seen before. These early innovations, while modest in their initial form, set the stage for an era of rapid technological advancement and economic transformation. But what would happen when these technologies were scaled up? How would they impact not just industries but societies as a whole? And more importantly, what would be the human cost of this industrial growth? As the technological innovations of the Industrial Revolution continued to evolve, their effects began to ripple through all aspects of society, most notably in the rapid urbanization that accompanied industrialization. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, Britain and much of Europe were predominantly rural, with the majority of people living and working on farms. However, by the mid-19th century, a dramatic shift began to take place as people moved in large numbers from the countryside to the cities, in search of jobs in the newly established factories. This migration was spurred by the mechanization of agriculture and the availability of factory work, which promised regular wages, albeit for long hours and under difficult conditions. The rise of large industrial cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool in Britain and other cities across Europe was a direct result of the expanding factory system. These cities, once small towns or rural settlements, were transformed into bustling urban centers as factories sprouted up to meet the increasing demand for goods. The population of London, for instance, grew from just under 1 million in 1800 to more than 6 million by the end of the 19th century. The transformation of rural workers into urban factory laborers had a profound impact on their daily lives. Life in the city was markedly different from the relative calm and self-sufficiency of rural life. While cities offered the allure of steady wages, they also brought with them a host of new problems. For many workers, the transition to city life was a harsh reality. Factories, where most of the labor was concentrated, were often overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and dangerous. Workers, including children, were expected to labor for 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. The work was grueling, repetitive, and offered little in the way of personal fulfillment. Living conditions in industrial cities were similarly dire. The rapid influx of people led to overcrowded housing, which was often unsanitary and poorly constructed. Entire neighborhoods sprang up around factories with little regard for public health or urban planning. Tenement housing, which was cramped and dark, became the norm for the working class. Many families were forced to share small, overcrowded rooms, and public sanitation was woefully inadequate. Disease spread quickly in these conditions, with cholera, tuberculosis, and typhoid fever running rampant in the crowded slums. The industrial cities, once symbols of economic progress, were becoming breeding grounds for social problems. The stark contrast between the wealthy industrialists, who profited from the labor of the workers, and the impoverished working class living in squalor was hard to ignore. This growing inequality spurred social unrest and movements calling for reform, such as the Chartist movement in Britain, which advocated for political reforms and better working conditions. Despite the difficult conditions, urbanization also brought some positive changes. The expansion of factories and industries created jobs for thousands of people, leading to a rise in wages for many, although these were often still insufficient to cover basic living expenses. The factory system allowed for greater production, which helped lower the cost of goods, making products like clothing, furniture, and tools more affordable to the growing middle class. The availability of mass-produced goods also gave rise to the consumer culture that would continue to grow throughout the century. Additionally, the Industrial Revolution spurred improvements in transportation, which had a profound effect on daily life. The steam engine, which powered trains and ships, made travel faster and more efficient. Railroads expanded rapidly across Britain and Europe, connecting cities and regions and opening up new markets for goods. This transportation revolution enabled goods to be shipped across greater distances, facilitated the movement of people, and contributed to the expansion of the global economy. For the first time in history, people could travel relatively easily between cities and countries, and goods could be produced in one region and sold in another. These advancements, however, did not come without a cost. While the steam engine revolutionized transportation, it also brought about new environmental challenges. The growing reliance on coal to fuel factories and engines led to increased pollution. Cities were choked by the smoke from factory chimneys, and rivers and air became heavily polluted with waste products. The Industrial Revolution, while advancing the human capacity for production and progress, was also contributing to environmental degradation, a problem that would only grow in severity in the centuries to come. The social structure, too, was changing. The rise of the industrial working class gave way to the emergence of a new middle class, made up of entrepreneurs, factory owners, and managers who reaped the benefits of industrialization. These middle-class individuals enjoyed better living conditions and had access to education and other privileges that the working class did not. The old aristocracy, once the dominant social class, saw its power decline as industrial wealth began to eclipse the traditional land-based wealth of the nobility. The growing divide between the working class and the industrialists fueled calls for social and political reform. The harsh realities of factory life, the lack of workers' rights, and the abuses of child labor brought attention to the plight of the poor. Writers such as Charles Dickens, who wrote novels like Oliver Twist and Hard Times, exposed the grim conditions in which many factory workers lived and worked. His works, along with those of other social reformers, helped bring about a greater awareness of the need for reforms, eventually leading to the establishment of labor rights and protections. Yet despite these challenges, the Industrial Revolution was fundamentally reshaping the world. It was changing not only the way goods were produced, but also the very fabric of society. It was creating new social classes, transforming cities, and fostering economic growth on an unprecedented scale. The technological innovations that had begun in small workshops and factories were now beginning to shape the world in ways that could not have been predicted. At the same time, the impact of urbanization and industrialization on workers' lives raised important questions. Was the promise of industrialization worth the sacrifices it required? How long could this unregulated system of labor and industrial expansion continue before it reached a breaking point? And what would be the long-term consequences for human health, the environment, and the social fabric of society? By the mid-19th century, the Industrial Revolution was no longer confined to Britain. It had spread across Europe, North America, and eventually to other parts of the world. The innovations in machinery, transportation, and factory-based production that had emerged during this period became the foundation for the modern industrialized world. But while these advances greatly transformed economies, societies, and the daily lives of millions, the legacy of the Industrial Revolution was mixed, raising both incredible opportunities and challenges that would continue to shape the future of humanity. The rapid advancements in technology and manufacturing systems had far-reaching consequences. The mass production techniques developed during the Industrial Revolution laid the groundwork for the modern consumer society. The ability to produce goods on an industrial scale made products more affordable, and the expanding transportation networks allowed them to reach broader markets. As a result, people across the globe, from Europe to North America and beyond, began to consume more goods, especially manufactured products. The rise of the middle class, spurred by industrial prosperity, created a new economic and social order that shifted the power dynamics of society. Economic growth and the rise of capitalism. The economic transformation that began during the Industrial Revolution laid the foundation for modern capitalism. Entrepreneurs, factory owners, and investors accumulated vast fortunes, and the wealth generated by industrialization helped fuel further technological advancements. The capitalist system, based on private ownership of the means of production and the pursuit of profit, became the dominant economic model, not just in Europe and North America, but across the globe. This new system, however, had its detractors. While industrialization created immense wealth, it also led to vast disparities in income and living standards. The working class, still reliant on factory labor for their livelihoods, continued to live in crowded, unsanitary conditions, and wages remained low. The gap between the rich industrialists and the poor workers became more pronounced, leading to a growing sense of social inequality and unrest. The rise of industrial capitalism also sparked the development of new political ideologies. Marxism, for example, emerged as a critique of capitalism, as Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels argued that the working class or proletariat was being exploited by the capitalist class. Marx's ideas on class struggle and the need for a revolution to overthrow capitalism would influence labor movements and revolutions in the coming century. The growing disparity between the rich and the poor also led to demands for reform. Workers, increasingly aware of their power, began to organize and demand better conditions, higher wages, and labor protections. Over time, unions gained traction and governments responded with laws to regulate working hours, child labor, and workplace safety. The push for labor rights and social reforms was one of the most important legacies of the Industrial Revolution, and its effects would continue to shape the political landscape for decades to come. The environmental impact of industrialization. The rapid expansion of industry and the use of coal as the primary energy source had significant environmental consequences. The smoke from factory chimneys filled the air, and rivers were polluted with the waste from industrial processes. Cities, once centers of agriculture or small towns, became smog-choked industrial hubs. The deforestation required for the expansion of mining and infrastructure took a toll on ecosystems. The environmental degradation caused by industrialization became a pressing issue by the late 19th century, and early environmental movements began to emerge. While the Industrial Revolution brought undeniable economic progress, it also introduced humanity to the concept of environmental degradation on a large scale. The consequences of industrial pollution and the unsustainable use of natural resources would become more apparent in the 20th and 21st centuries, culminating in global challenges such as climate change, loss of biodiversity, and the depletion of natural resources. The Industrial Revolution, though beneficial in many respects, planted the seeds for modern environmental crises that continue to require urgent attention and action. The changing nature of work and the rise of consumerism. As industries grew, so did the labor force. The factory system, which had emerged as a result of the industrialization of textile production, expanded into other sectors. People flocked to cities in search of factory work, and entire industries, such as steel production, coal mining, and textiles, relied on mass labor. The development of new machines allowed for the mass production of goods from clothing to household products and led to the birth of consumerism. The rise of mass production and the availability of cheap, machine-made goods revolutionized the way people lived. Goods that had once been expensive or difficult to obtain were now within reach of ordinary people. This led to the creation of new markets and the expansion of consumer culture, particularly in the Western world. The Industrial Revolution helped create the modern economy we know today, one that is driven by mass production, mass consumption, and an ever-expanding network of goods and services. However, the rise of consumerism also had unintended social and cultural consequences. The relentless pursuit of profit and the drive to create cheaper and more efficient products created a cycle of consumption and waste that many argue has led to the unsustainable lifestyle that characterizes much of the modern world. The growing focus on material wealth and the acquisition of goods altered traditional social values and contributed to the growth of a consumer-driven culture. The global impact of the Industrial Revolution. While the Industrial Revolution began in Britain, its effects were soon felt worldwide. By the 19th century, the industrialized nations of Europe and North America had begun to export their technologies and ideas, resulting in the spread of industrialization to other parts of the world. This had both positive and negative effects. On the one hand, industrialization allowed for the development of new industries and technologies, which helped improve living standards in many parts of the world. On the other hand, it also fueled colonialism and imperialism, as industrialized nations sought to expand their empires in search of raw materials, markets, and new sources of labor. The spread of industrialization to other parts of the world helped shape the modern global economy. Nations that embraced industrialization, such as Japan, Germany, and the United States, became powerful economic forces, while those that remained agricultural or failed to industrialize became increasingly marginalized. The competition for resources and markets between industrialized nations contributed to global tensions and conflicts, culminating in events like the two world wars in the 20th century. The lasting legacy of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, although it began as a set of modest technological innovations, eventually reshaped the entire world. It transformed economies, societies, and cultures, creating both wealth and inequality, progress and destruction. The consequences of industrialization are still being felt today, from the global economy to the environment and even the way we live and work. It was without question one of the most transformative periods in human history. The questions that the Industrial Revolution raised about labor, equality, environmental sustainability, and the role of technology in society are still relevant today. The continuing challenges we face in a rapidly industrialized world, climate change, economic inequality, and the ethical implications of new technologies, are directly linked to the forces unleashed during this pivotal period. The Industrial Revolution teaches us that technological progress and economic growth must be tempered with responsibility and foresight, or the very systems that drive progress may also undermine it. The Great Pyramids of Giza stand as one of the most enduring symbols of ancient Egypt's grandeur and ingenuity. These towering structures, which have fascinated historians, archaeologists, and tourists for millennia, were not built by the pharaohs alone. In fact, the workers who labored to construct these magnificent tombs have largely remained in the shadows of history. Often forgotten in the grandeur of these ancient monuments are the lives of the men and women who spent years, or even decades, working to bring the pharaoh's vision to life. To understand how the pyramids were built, we must first explore the context of ancient Egypt during the Old Kingdom, a time when Egypt's power and influence were at their peak. The pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, c. 2686–2181 BCE, were seen as divine rulers believed to be gods on earth. The most famous of these rulers is Khufu, also known as Cheops, the pharaoh for whom the Great Pyramid at Giza was built. Khufu's pyramid, originally standing at 146 meters (480 feet), was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Khufu's reign marked the zenith of pyramid construction, and his monument became a symbol of royal power and divine authority. Building the pyramids, however, was not a task that could be accomplished with the flick of a royal hand. The construction required thousands of workers, most of whom were not slaves as is commonly believed, but rather skilled laborers, artisans, and seasonal workers who were hired and paid for their efforts. These workers, many of whom were likely farmers, were employed during the annual flooding of the Nile River when their land was underwater and farming was impossible. It was during this period that the Egyptian government would organize large workforces to undertake massive state-sponsored projects, such as the construction of temples, tombs, and most famously, the pyramids. The workers were organized into teams that performed different tasks, such as cutting stone, transporting materials, and laying the blocks. The workforce was likely divided into specialized crews, with skilled laborers handling the most difficult tasks and less skilled workers doing the manual labor. The sheer scale of the undertaking is mind-boggling. Estimates suggest that the Great Pyramid alone required over 2 million limestone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, to be transported and meticulously placed. In the early years of Egyptology, it was believed that the pyramids were built by slaves who toiled under the harsh command of the pharaohs. However, recent archaeological evidence has painted a very different picture. Excavations at worker cemeteries near the pyramids have revealed that many of these workers were actually well-fed and received proper care. In fact, the workers were likely organized into a form of temporary labor force that would have worked in rotating shifts. They lived in workers' villages where their diet consisted of bread, meat, and beer, basic staples for the ancient Egyptian workforce. The workers who built the pyramids did not work in isolation. They were part of a larger economic system that relied on the resources of Egypt's vast agricultural economy. The grains grown along the Nile, for example, were used to feed the workers, while the stone blocks used for construction were quarried from nearby sites. Transportation of these massive stones was a feat of engineering in itself, with workers using sledges, ramps, and possibly even rollable logs to move the stone from the quarries to the construction site. As the construction of the pyramids progressed, the workers labored not only under the supervision of skilled architects and engineers, but also with the knowledge that they were helping to achieve something monumental. The pyramid was more than just a tomb for the pharaoh. It was a testament to the strength of Egypt and its gods, a symbol of eternal life that would outlast the ages. The workers' efforts were not just to honor the pharaoh, but also to ensure his safe passage to the afterlife, a deeply spiritual belief in ancient Egypt. Life for the workers was difficult, with long hours and strenuous physical labor. Yet the workers were not entirely powerless. Evidence suggests that they were organized into a well-managed system with an understanding of the significance of their work. Workers at Giza even had access to health care, as evidenced by remains that show evidence of medical treatment for injuries, bones that were fractured or broken, and other health issues. Their deaths were marked with respect. Many workers were buried near the pyramid complex in specially constructed tombs. These were not the anonymous graves of slaves, but rather the resting places of individuals who were, in some ways, honored for their labor. The actual process of pyramid construction remains a subject of debate among historians and archaeologists. Some propose that a massive straight ramp was built to move the stone blocks up the pyramid sides, while others suggest a spiral ramp or a combination of ramps. Regardless of the method, what is clear is that the construction of the pyramids was a feat of extraordinary engineering and logistics, relying on an extensive labor force, careful planning, and coordination. These workers, though not celebrated in the way the pharaohs were instrumental in creating one of the world's most enduring and iconic monuments. But how did these workers perceive their role in the great project? Were they simply doing their jobs, or did they have a sense of the grandeur of what they were building? And what did their lives look like outside of the pyramid complex when the workday was over? The workers who constructed the Great Pyramids lived under very different conditions than the royal family or the elite class in ancient Egypt. While the pharaohs, priests, and nobles lived in relative luxury, the workers endured long hours, grueling physical labor, and difficult living conditions. However, there was also a sense of community among the workers, who were often organized into teams, and evidence suggests they took pride in their work. The life of a pyramid laborer was far from glamorous, but it was built on a foundation of skill, teamwork, and a deep-seated belief in the significance of the project. The workers lived in purpose-built villages that were located near the pyramid construction sites. These villages, such as the one discovered at Giza in the 1990s, were organized with streets, houses, and shared facilities like bakeries and kitchens. The workers' homes were simple mud brick structures, typically with 1 or 2 rooms, offering just enough shelter from the harsh desert climate. These homes, although modest, were well-planned and organized, with evidence of communal spaces where workers could gather and rest after a long day. These settlements were self-sustaining, with workers growing some of their own food, although much of their sustenance would have been provided by the central government. Archaeological findings indicate that the workers were often fed a diet that was both hearty and nutritious, especially for laborers who performed physically demanding tasks. Grains such as barley and wheat were staples of their diet, but they were also given meat. Goat, sheep, and cattle were common sources of protein. Beer, which was a common drink in ancient Egypt, was consumed daily. It was not just a beverage, it was part of the laborers' wages. In fact, beer was one of the most important parts of their daily sustenance, as it was both nourishing and hydrating in the heat of the Egyptian sun. The provision of these foods, including the beer, demonstrates that the workers were valued by the state and not viewed as mere slaves. Despite their hard work and basic living conditions, these laborers were not just faceless pawns in the creation of the pyramids. They were skilled workers and craftsmen who contributed to the intricate design and construction of one of the world's most iconic monuments. Many of these workers were specialized laborers, including stone carvers, masons, and architects, whose contributions required a great deal of expertise. The laborers' skill and knowledge are evident in the accuracy and precision of the pyramid's construction. For example, the vast stone blocks used to construct the Great Pyramid were cut with incredible precision, requiring the work of expert craftsmen to ensure that they fit together perfectly. These specialized laborers were organized into crews that worked under the supervision of foremen and engineers. The foreman would oversee the organization of the workers, ensuring that the different teams could complete their tasks efficiently. This hierarchical structure within the workforce meant that there was a sense of order and discipline, and it helped keep the construction process moving smoothly. Although many of the laborers were seasonal workers, those who worked year-round on the pyramid construction were likely part of the more skilled workforce, who were responsible for overseeing the logistics of the project. While the workers did not enjoy the comforts of the royal palace, they had a sense of community and purpose. These men were not just building a tomb for the pharaoh, they were constructing a monument to eternity. They believed that their labor would help ensure the pharaoh's passage to the afterlife and guarantee his eternal presence among the gods. This belief in the religious significance of their work undoubtedly gave many workers a sense of pride and purpose, even if they were not directly benefiting from the grandeur of the project. At the same time, life for the laborers was hard. The work was physically exhausting and the conditions were often uncomfortable. The workers were exposed to the harsh desert heat and the daily labor was taxing. Many workers spent their days moving and lifting massive stone blocks, carving intricate designs, and laying each piece with painstaking care. There were also dangers involved in the work, as the construction sites were not always as safe as we would expect today. Despite the care taken with the workers' health, injuries were likely common, and the workers had to endure the physical toll of their labor. The workers' graves, discovered in excavations at Giza and other pyramid sites, provide us with some insight into their lives and deaths. Unlike the grand tombs of the pharaohs and elites, the workers' graves were modest, but they were still treated with respect. In the workers' cemeteries, archaeologists have uncovered evidence that many of the laborers were given proper burial rites. The workers' graves were often decorated with simple offerings, and some graves contained tools, pottery, and figurines that reflected their daily lives. One particularly notable discovery was the tomb of the pyramid builders, a burial site where workers were buried with a degree of honor that suggested they were valued members of society. These tombs, with their careful organization and artifacts, indicate that the workers were not slaves, but rather skilled laborers who took part in one of the most important projects in ancient Egypt's history. The relationship between the workers and the ruling class also raises interesting questions. While it is clear that the laborers were under the authority of the pharaohs, their treatment appears to have been more respectful than we might expect in a society that built such monumental structures. This has led some archaeologists to theorize that the work on the pyramids was more of a civic duty than a form of forced labor. The workers, though not wealthy, likely understood their role in the great cosmic order of ancient Egypt. Their labor was seen as a form of service to the gods and the pharaoh, and the work they did was part of a larger spiritual mission. While much of the history of the pyramid workers remains shrouded in mystery, these discoveries help us piece together a more nuanced view of their lives. The laborers who built the pyramids were not nameless slaves, but skilled individuals who lived in tightly organized communities. They endured harsh conditions but were valued for their expertise and in many cases were respected for their contributions to the pharaoh's eternal legacy. As we reflect on the lives of the workers who built the pyramids, we are left with several questions. How did these workers perceive their monumental task? Did they truly understand the significance of what they were building, or was it simply a means to an end? And perhaps most poignantly, what do the graves of these workers tell us about their sense of identity and place in ancient Egyptian society? The Great Pyramids of Giza are not only a testament to the grandeur of ancient Egypt, but also to the incredible engineering and labor that went into their construction. The workers who built these monuments left behind an enduring legacy, not just in the form of the pyramids themselves, but in the techniques and organization of labor that would influence building practices for centuries to come. Today, the methods used by the ancient Egyptians in constructing the pyramids continue to inspire awe and curiosity. while the lives of the workers who made such feats possible remain a symbol of the unseen labor that underpins even the grandest achievements. While much of the focus on the pyramids has traditionally been placed on the pharaohs, their architects, and the wonders of the monuments themselves, the laborers who carried out the actual construction are no less significant. These workers, though not directly celebrated in the ancient texts, formed the backbone of the pyramid-building project. It was their hands that carved the stone, laid the blocks, and worked in harsh conditions to create the lasting symbol of Egypt's power. Their work was the product of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge, refined techniques, and the organizational skills of both the workers themselves and their overseers. One of the most striking aspects of the ancient Egyptian labor system was its organization. The construction of the pyramids required not just skilled workers, but an entire network of specialists who could manage and execute the tasks involved. The workers were divided into various teams based on their skill levels and the nature of their work. Some teams were responsible for cutting and shaping the stone blocks, while others focused on transporting the blocks from quarries to the construction site. Still others were tasked with the actual assembly of the pyramids, carefully positioning each stone with incredible precision. The workers did not operate in isolation. They were part of a well-structured and well-supported labor force, with oversight from experienced foremen and architects. This organized approach to large-scale construction was groundbreaking. In many ways, it laid the groundwork for modern building practices. The concept of organized labor, the division of tasks, and the centralization of resources became key components of construction projects for centuries to come. The precision with which the ancient Egyptians cut and fit the massive stone blocks, often to millimeter accuracy, would influence building techniques in both the ancient and modern worlds. Techniques developed by the Egyptians, such as the use of ramps to move stone blocks and the careful management of labor forces, remain relevant to engineers and architects even today. In terms of construction methods, the ancient Egyptians used a combination of brute force, ingenuity, and simple tools to move and place massive stone blocks. Ramps, either straight or spiraling, were used to haul the enormous stones up the sides of the pyramids. Sledges, rollers, and levers helped move the blocks across the ground. The transportation of the stone blocks, many of which weighed several tons, was a massive logistical challenge. Teams of workers would drag sledges loaded with the blocks over wooden tracks, using a combination of manpower and tools. The construction of the pyramids, particularly the Great Pyramid, was a massive effort that required not just physical labor but also a deep understanding of engineering principles. The level of coordination required for such a massive project was extraordinary. It required precise scheduling, the organization of a massive workforce, and the efficient allocation of resources, all of which are hallmarks of modern construction projects. The organization of the labor force and the planning behind the project was so sophisticated that some historians have compared it to modern industrial operations. The workers themselves, though, were not industrial workers in the modern sense. Their work was deeply connected to their culture, religion, and beliefs. The pyramids were not merely architectural achievements. They were deeply tied to the spiritual and religious life of ancient Egypt. The work that the laborers performed was not seen as a mere job, but as a service to the gods and the pharaoh, who was believed to be a divine ruler. The idea that the pharaoh's tomb would help him ascend to the afterlife and continue to rule in eternity was central to Egyptian belief. As such, the workers may have viewed their labor as part of a larger cosmic mission. The sense of contributing to something eternal, something that would outlast their own lifetimes, may have provided the workers with a sense of purpose, despite the hardships they endured. In terms of legacy, the workers who built the pyramids are a reflection of the intersection between human labor and grand vision. Their work created not only monuments to the pharaohs, but also a lasting cultural identity for Egypt. The pyramids and the methods used to construct them became a model of excellence in craftsmanship, engineering, and organization. Even today, the precision with which the stones of the pyramids were placed and the scale of the structures continue to inspire awe. The Great Pyramid, as the largest of the 3 pyramids at Giza, stands as a testament to the skill and ingenuity of its builders. Its alignment with the stars, the precision of its measurements, and the sheer scale of the project have left scholars and engineers alike puzzled and fascinated. The methods developed by the ancient Egyptians for cutting, moving, and placing the stones have had a lasting impact on construction practices throughout history. The workers who built the pyramids were far more than just laborers. They were a part of a highly organized and sophisticated effort to create something that would last for millennia. They understood their role in building something eternal, a tomb for the pharaoh, a gateway to the afterlife, and a symbol of the power of Egypt. Their work was not only physical but deeply embedded in the spiritual and religious beliefs of the time. The pyramids were designed not just as physical structures but as cosmic symbols, linking the ruler with the gods. The laborers, therefore, were not simply building structures but contributing to a divine mission. This sense of purpose likely made the difficult and dangerous work more meaningful. This dedication to the task at hand and the understanding of their work's significance had an impact on future generations. The legacy of these laborers is not just in the monuments they helped create, but also in the organizational systems and methods of construction that were passed down through generations. The use of skilled labor, the division of tasks, the organization of large workforces, and the application of engineering principles are all hallmarks of modern construction techniques. Even in contemporary building projects, we see echoes of the ancient Egyptian methods. The use of cranes and lifts to move heavy materials, the careful planning of construction logistics, and the focus on precise measurements. Interestingly, the Egyptian approach to construction also set a precedent for how we think about labor today. Modern construction practices, particularly those involving large-scale projects, often involve the coordination of diverse groups of workers, each contributing specialized skills. This concept of organized labor with distinct roles and responsibilities was pioneered by the Egyptians in the construction of their monuments. In many ways, the workers who built the pyramids were the precursors to the modern construction workforce, working in highly structured environments that demanded both skill and efficiency. As time passed, the knowledge and practices developed during the era of pyramid construction were preserved and passed down through subsequent generations. The ancient Egyptians had a profound understanding of mathematics, engineering, and astronomy, which were essential to the construction of the pyramids. Their work laid the foundation for the architectural achievements of later civilizations, such as the Greeks and Romans, who adopted many Egyptian techniques and refined them. The influence of Egyptian building practices can be seen in the grand structures of the classical world, from the Parthenon in Athens to the Colosseum in Rome. The workers' graves, which have been uncovered in recent archaeological excavations, provide important insights into the lives of these laborers and offer a glimpse into the past that was long hidden. While the names of these workers were often forgotten, their contributions live on in the legacy of the pyramids and in the continuing study of ancient Egyptian construction techniques. Their work was vital to the creation of one of the world's most iconic structures, and their influence can still be seen in the world of architecture and construction today. The idea of building something that would last for eternity is a theme that resonates throughout history, from the ancient Egyptians to modern societies. The pyramid workers, through their dedication, skill, and understanding of the spiritual importance of their labor, were not simply constructing buildings. They were creating a lasting symbol of a civilization's grandeur. The pyramids remain a testament to the laborers' expertise, their enduring commitment to their craft, and their place in the ancient Egyptian worldview. Today, when we look at the Great Pyramids of Giza, we see more than just stone structures. We see the enduring legacy of the workers who made it all possible. In the end, the workers of the pyramids were not simply anonymous laborers. They were part of a grand vision that transcended their lives and left a lasting mark on history. Their contribution to the construction of the pyramids is a reminder of the often overlooked labor that underpins great achievements. Just as we admire the beauty and scale of the pyramids today, we must also recognize the invaluable contribution of those who made it possible. The pyramids stand not only as monuments to the pharaohs, but as monuments to the workers who, through their skill, endurance, and dedication, helped to shape the future of architecture and construction. The morning of September 2, 1666 began like any other in London. The bustling streets of the city were crowded with merchants, tradesmen, and workers, all engaged in their daily routines. The city, which had long been a hub of commerce, culture, and power, was thriving. But by the evening of that same day, London would be unrecognizable. A fire, which started in a small bakery on Pudding Lane, would grow into one of the most devastating disasters the city had ever experienced, changing the landscape of London forever. London in 1666 was a city of narrow, winding streets and timber-framed houses. The majority of buildings in the city were constructed from wood, and many of them were dangerously close to one another, making the city a tinderbox waiting to ignite. The fire that started in Thomas Farner's bakery on Pudding Lane was a simple, tragic accident. A spark from the bakery's oven set fire to the wooden building. What could have been a small, contained fire quickly spiraled out of control, aided by a strong wind and the dry summer that had left the city parched. As the fire began to spread, the city's firefighting systems were woefully inadequate. The most effective way to combat fires in 17th-century London was through the use of water, but the city's water supply was inconsistent, and the firefighting teams were small and poorly equipped. Fire breaks, which were intended to stop the spread of flames by demolishing buildings, were rarely used, and when they were not always effective. As a result, the fire spread quickly through the narrow streets, consuming one building after another. The fire raged through the night, and by the next morning it had grown uncontrollably. The flames leaped from one building to the next, turning the sky orange with smoke. Londoners watched in horror as their city burned. The fire spread across the city's most important districts, including the royal residence of the Tower of London and the heart of the city's commercial life. The medieval core where important buildings like St. Paul's Cathedral, the Guildhall, and the Royal Exchange were located. The flames consumed entire neighborhoods, and what was once a thriving city of nearly 500,000 people began to disintegrate. Despite the best efforts of the city's residents to fight the fire, much of London was left defenseless. As the fire grew, there was a sense of helplessness among the people. Citizens fled their homes, grabbing what they could carry. The royal family, led by King Charles II, watched in desperation, and efforts to stop the fire using more aggressive fire breaks were hindered by disagreements over the methods and the difficulty of implementing such a strategy. The fire continued to destroy the city, and by the time it finally began to subside on September 6, it had devastated large portions of London. The toll was staggering. The fire destroyed around 87 churches, 13,000 houses, and dozens of important public buildings. Thousands of people were displaced, left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The fire killed at least 6 people, though some historians believe the true number could have been much higher as many bodies were consumed by the flames. London had been laid to waste. It was a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, but in its wake, the fire also presented an opportunity for the city to rebuild, not just physically, but socially and politically. But how could a city that had been so thoroughly ravaged by flames rise from the ashes? What would London look like after such a catastrophic event? And what would be the lasting impact of the fire on the people who survived and on the future of the city itself? When the last flames of the Great Fire of 1666 finally died down, London was left in a state of devastation. The heart of the city was reduced to ash, and thousands of homes, shops, churches, and public buildings lay in ruins. But even in the face of such overwhelming loss, Londoners began the difficult task of rebuilding their city. The fire had destroyed much of what was familiar, but it also presented a rare opportunity to reshape and modernize the city, something that would not have been possible had it continued to function in its medieval form. The first task for Londoners was addressing the immediate needs of the population. The fire had displaced tens of thousands of people, leaving them homeless and vulnerable. Temporary shelters were set up on the outskirts of the city, and food and supplies were provided by the government and charitable organizations. The people of London, though traumatized, banded together in the wake of the disaster. In the face of adversity, their resilience shone through as they began to rebuild their lives and their homes. Yet rebuilding the physical infrastructure of the city was a far more complex task. London had been a sprawling, chaotic city, with narrow, winding streets and densely packed buildings. It was a city that had grown organically over centuries, without any real planning or organization. Now, after the fire, there was an opportunity to rethink how the city should be laid out, how its buildings should be constructed, and how its residents could be better protected from future disasters. The process of rebuilding would be a long and challenging one, but it was also an opportunity to modernize London and ensure that it would be safer and more resilient in the future. One of the most pressing challenges was the issue of construction materials. Before the fire, most of London's buildings had been constructed from timber, a material that was not only easily flammable but also difficult to regulate. The fire had proven the dangers of wooden buildings, and it became clear that London needed to adopt safer building practices. In the aftermath of the fire, the government passed a series of laws mandating that new buildings be constructed from brick or stone, materials that were far less likely to catch fire. These regulations were a direct response to the fire's devastating impact, and they helped transform the city's architectural landscape. But the process of rebuilding was not just about changing building materials. It was also about reshaping the city's urban design. The medieval streets of London had been narrow, winding, and poorly organized. They had grown without any clear plan, and the dense housing and commercial areas had made the spread of the fire almost inevitable. In the aftermath of the disaster, the question arose, should the city's layout be redesigned to prevent such a tragedy in the future? Enter Sir Christopher Wren, the renowned architect and mathematician, who would play a central role in the rebuilding of London. Wren was appointed by King Charles II to oversee the reconstruction of St. Paul's Cathedral, which had been one of the most significant buildings destroyed in the fire. However, Wren's vision extended far beyond just St. Paul's. He proposed sweeping changes to the city's architecture and urban planning. Wren advocated for wider streets, grander public spaces, and more regular street grids that would make the city more navigable and less prone to future fires. He also envisioned a more harmonious and unified architectural style, with a focus on classical design elements that would bring a sense of order and dignity to the rebuilt city. Despite the brilliance of Wren's vision, his plans for the city were only partially realized. Political disagreements, funding issues, and resistance from local property owners prevented many of Wren's ideas from coming to fruition. However, his work on St. Paul's Cathedral stands as one of the greatest achievements of the rebuilding period. The cathedral, which would become one of London's most iconic landmarks, was designed with a massive dome and classical columns, a style that would influence English architecture for generations. Other architects and planners also contributed to the rebuilding effort, creating a more resilient and aesthetically pleasing city. While the streets did not fully adopt Wren's grand plans for completely modernized London, new regulations regarding building materials and the organization of public spaces slowly began to take effect. As the city rebuilt itself, it became safer, cleaner, and more orderly, though the scars of the fire were still visible in many areas. In addition to physical rebuilding, the Great Fire of 1666 also had social and political ramifications. The fire had exposed the vulnerabilities of London's infrastructure, and many began to question the effectiveness of the city's governance and emergency preparedness. The aftermath of the fire prompted changes in how the city was managed, leading to the creation of better systems for firefighting, public health, and urban planning. The establishment of a more coordinated approach to disaster response became a key aspect of the city's recovery. Despite the many challenges, London emerged from the ashes of the Great Fire stronger and more resilient. The city's recovery process was slow, but it was marked by a sense of determination and unity. In the years that followed, London began to grow again, expanding both physically and economically. The fire had destroyed much, but it had also paved the way for a modernized city that would become the heart of the British Empire and a global center of trade, culture, and politics. However, the fire also left a lasting psychological impact on the people of London. For years after the disaster, Londoners remained wary of future fires, and firefighting techniques and fire prevention became a central concern of city governance. The memory of the fire lingered, but it also led to important reforms in how the city was managed and how its people were protected from future disasters. The Great Fire of London had been a tragedy, but it also provided an opportunity for growth and improvement, shaping the future of the city in ways that would have been unimaginable before. The story of the Great Fire of London is a story of loss, resilience, and transformation. It is a reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of human settlements, but also of the capacity for recovery and reinvention. As London rebuilt itself after the fire, it was not just rebuilding structures, but also laying the groundwork for the modern city that we know today. But how did the Great Fire's aftermath shape the development of fire safety and urban planning? And how did Londoners deal with the long-lasting trauma of the fire, and what lessons did they learn that would help them navigate future challenges? The Great Fire of London was more than just a destructive event. It was a turning point that reshaped the city's physical landscape and transformed the approach to urban planning, fire safety, and governance. Though the fire left much of the city in ruins, its aftermath ushered in a new era of architectural innovation and regulatory reform that would influence London's development for centuries to come. One of the most immediate long-term effects was the introduction of strict building regulations aimed at preventing another catastrophe of similar scale. The Fire of London Act of 1667 mandated the use of fire-resistant materials such as brick and stone for rebuilding homes and public buildings. Timber-framed houses, once ubiquitous in the city, were banned or heavily restricted. This marked a dramatic shift from the previous construction methods that had contributed to the rapid spread of the fire. The new building codes also regulated the width of streets, the spacing between buildings, and the heights of structures. Narrow, winding medieval streets were to be replaced by wider, straighter thoroughfares designed not only for better traffic flow, but to serve as fire breaks. The intent was to create a cityscape that could better contain and resist future fires. Although many of these plans faced resistance from property owners and took years to fully implement, the direction was clear. London would be rebuilt as a safer, more organized city. Sir Christopher Wren's influence in this new London cannot be overstated. His masterwork, the rebuilt St. Paul's Cathedral, became a symbol of the city's rebirth. More than 50 churches destroyed by the fire were also reconstructed under Wren's direction, many of which featured classical architectural elements that blended Renaissance grandeur with Baroque detail. This architectural renaissance gave London a distinctive character, blending tradition with innovation. Beyond architecture, the fire catalyzed improvements in urban management. The city established more effective firefighting organizations, including the formation of early fire brigades equipped with new pumps and tools. The lessons learned from the fire emphasized the importance of preparedness and rapid response. City officials created systems for regular fire watches and patrols, especially during dry seasons, and the enforcement of building codes became more rigorous. The social impact of the fire also lingered for decades. Thousands had lost their homes and livelihoods, and the government had to implement measures to help displaced citizens rebuild their lives. This crisis underscored the need for better urban infrastructure and social safety nets, concepts that would gradually develop in the centuries following. Moreover, the Great Fire's psychological impact shaped the collective memory of Londoners. The event became a reference point for disaster preparedness and urban resilience, embedding the idea that even a great city is vulnerable but capable of renewal. Commemorations, such as the Monument to the Great Fire of London, served both as memorials and as symbols of human determination to rise from devastation. The fire also had a lasting influence on city planning worldwide. London's post-fire rebuilding efforts inspired other cities to rethink urban design, leading to more fire-conscious architecture and planning principles in Europe and beyond. The emphasis on fire-resistant materials, wider streets, and organized firefighting became models for modern urban safety standards. In conclusion, the Great Fire of London was a disaster that irrevocably changed the city, but it was also a catalyst for progress. Through tragedy, London transformed itself, blending its historic roots with modern principles of safety, design, and governance. The rebuilt city was safer, more resilient, and better prepared for the challenges ahead. Yet this transformation raised new questions. How would the balance between preservation and modernization be maintained in a city so steeped in history? And how did the survivors of the fire carry forward the lessons learned into the future of London's growth?